President of the Salt River Pima-Maricopa Indian community in Arizona. With me today are just a few of the affected landowners in my community, but I have some comments that I wish to make on behalf of the community itself. I'm here to present public comment on the proposed residential business and wind and solar leasing regulations. Salt River Pima-Maricopa Indian community has close to 10,000 enrolled members. We have 52,000 acres in central Arizona. A lot of that land is becoming more and more valuable for development. But I need to tell you that about close to half of our population is under the age of 18. That statistic ought to tell you a lot about our housing needs, about the coming housing needs that are going to become even more as the years pass. The community and its members have very grave concerns regarding these proposed regulations. Specifically, we are concerned about the residential leases. If adopted, these home site leasing regulations will make homeship on allotted lands virtually impossible for most of us and most of our families. I want to acknowledge the Agua Caliente staff person that spoke. I think he articulated some of our concerns as well. But I want to tell you also that I know firsthand as an individual Indian that owns an interest in land, allotted land in my community. It's frustrating because I've complied with all the BIA requirements about 30 years ago in getting a home site. I, like a lot of other people in my community, went and got the required 51% interest signatures and approval from my family and my relatives for my home site. My family built my house literally by hand. And in doing so, we didn't have a lot of money. So to make a foundation, we had the bricklayers go down maybe a foot, not even a foot, and put down concrete blocks and fill it in with cement. That was the foundation. And then the bricks came in to complete the house, and the rest of it we did ourselves. Now, as the years have passed, I've added on to there with the assistance of my tribal government for home improvement loans. But there's a problem with the original structure right now in that it's eroded. Some of the irrigation has affected the stability of it. And I have a hole under my house that I keep filling up with dirt and with cement wherever possible. I cannot get repairs to my house by my tribal government, although there are program monies for seniors, and I am a senior. And there's assistance available to do that, because I went back and I found out that my original home site lease, my grant of authority from my fellow family members is invalid. I don't have a home site, so my tribe cannot come in and fix the problem in my house. Even if I wanted to build a new house right next to my existing house, I can't do that because I don't have a home site. Back then, I had to get signatures from one page of people. It was probably about 12 to 14 people. Over the years, people have come and gone. The land has become more fractionated. These new requirements will now require that I get over 110 signatures. And as I told you before, Brian, and I mentioned to all the federal people in Washington, not all of those people are findable. Some of them have not been in the community for a while, and some of them don't like me. We all have family issues, every one of us. And some of them know that the BIA is proposing payment, and they're going to stand there and fold their arms and say, no, I'm not going to do it. I want my payment. I want my rent. And I bring this to your attention because not only does this touch all affected allotted landowners, but I am simply one of about 400 people in the Salt River Pima-Maricopa Indian community who have houses but don't have a valid lease and are limited in what assistance we can get. Can't do a mortgage. Can't do any of that. There's over 400 houses and 400 families, and the folks that are with me today here are just a few of those. The community overall supports the proposed regulations on commercial and wind and solar. We will provide some written comments on these specific areas of the proposed regs by the end of the deadline. However, the community urges and requests that you withdraw and separate out the proposed home site lease regulations for further consultation, as was suggested by Agua Caliente. I'm going to suggest that you do that indefinitely, because we are a self-governance tribe, and that means that our government has a lot of direct communication with our landowners. But across this country, a lot of tribes and tribal members do not have this information, and they're not going to know it. If you put these regulations in place, as time progresses and these regulations come to light by other tribal members across the country, they're going to say, hey, what happened? How come I didn't know about this? Tribal governments are going to say, what are you doing? So we ask that you withdraw the home site lease regulations from adoption until further consultation and further work. We must have more opportunity to review the detrimental impacts that these regulations will have on tribal communities nationally and tribal families. For the record, I want to note specifically the community's key concerns regarding the proposed home site regulations. Our legal staff have analyzed these. As I mentioned earlier, Brian has seen me before, Del has seen me before, Larry Echohawk has seen us before, and in fact I have a call in to Mr. Echohawk right now, who is on travel, to further discuss these proposals. Our legal staff is here, and I'm going to ask for some time for Teresa Rozier to address some specifics, time permitting. Appraisal costs, specifically, our concerns. The first one are the appraisal costs and the increased delay in the home site process. A potential homeowner will be required to obtain an appraisal or market study assessing the valuation for rental compensation of our land, of our family's land. Who's going to pay for this? It's the number one question. The BIA, Office of Special Trust. Are there additional budget fundings for the federal government to pay $1,500 to $4,000 for an individual appraisal? Because I'll tell you, a lot of our people don't have that money. Number three, the homeowner. How many of us here can pull out $1,000 to $2,000 to $3,000? Because we've asked about the cost of that. It's not workable, simply not workable. The second area, going beyond the requirements of the Indian Land Consolidation Act and requiring a waiver of rental compensation by 100% of the allotted landowners, is another very serious, grave concern that we have. After the Office of Special Trust determines and assesses fair market value, the potential homeowner must then ask all other landowners or people that have an interest in a particular allotment to waive in writing the rental compensation. Not only is it burdensome because you have got highly fractionated lands in a lot of parts of the country, but this requirement goes above and beyond the provisions of ILCA, as these proposed regulations require all 100% of the landowners to waive rental compensation. ILCA only requires the lessee to obtain certain percentages based upon the fractionation of the land. We've done that in the past. I think that's what I did. I got more than 50%, 51% of the interest people to agree. As such, rental compensation in these proposals will always be paid to landowners who are whereabouts unknown and probated estates. Will the BIA waive compensation for probated estates? Right now in the community we have a lot of agricultural leases, and there are IIM accounts already set up for those folks that are not findable. So that's already taken care of. It simply doesn't make sense for land that to pay rent on land that you own. And I know that the community members that are here are going to say that. This is anti-cultural. It's anti-who we are as tribal people. Number 5, in the community, if all current landowners were to pay rent for every home site within our boundary, and I'm going to talk about the administrative nightmare, Salt River alone will be processing over 55,000 annual lease checks simply for land rental. 55,000. Who's going to do that? Is the Bureau going to do that? We're self-governance. And that creates a whole other area of concern for our self-governance and the self-governance status of every other tribe, the tribes in the country that are self-governance. Does the BIA have the budget and the resources to manage this substantial increase in IIM accounts? The third large concern that we have are the eviction or trespass actions against Indian families proposed when there is a default on the home site lease. You see that in section 162.365. Once a lease is obtained, a homeowner must pay rental compensation to all non-consenting landowners for the life of the lease. We've got 65 years, 50 years. Is the Bureau required to evict Indian families when rental payments lapse? Is the BIA prepared to evict Indian people, elders, children when rental payments lapse? Who's going to do that? Is the Bureau going to say, Salt River, your self-governance, you do it? I'm not going to do it. And I don't think any tribal leader in this country is going to do it. So you mentioned earlier an appeal process. Those appeal processes can take a long time, and I tell you, if this gets enacted, we're going to use as much appeal time as possible. So we're all going to be faced with huge, nightmarish appeal times and deadlines and so on administratively. If an Indian homeowner defaults on lease payments at some point during the life of the lease, then the BIA and the self-governance will be responsible for pursuing default of the lease, the back rents, and eviction of the family. The word unconscionable comes to mind. This is unconscionable. Number 4, the unreasonable 5-year rental adjustments provided for. Per the proposed regulations, every 5 years there will be a periodic adjustment to rental valuation. This provision is not reasonable for a number of reasons. First, in requiring rental adjustments, the presumption is that home site leases are similar to for-profit commercial leases, because that's what you do when you have business leases. Everybody knows that. Home site leases are not commercial economic development endeavors. Reevaluation of land rents is completely inappropriate in the home site setting. Home site leases are about providing adequate and safe housing to tribal families, and they are not commercial ventures. Second, does BIA and Office of Special Trust have the budgetary or staff resources to provide appraisal services 10 times through the life of a 50-year lease? Or are you going to have self-governance tribes do that? That's creating an administrative nightmare for us. 5, impractical bonding and insurance requirements. Moreover, the requiring of performance, rental, and reclamation bonds by the homeowner is another obstacle. It's a huge obstacle for Indian housing. These requirements alone will destroy the ability of allotted landowners, us, to build new housing on our family's land. Again, the presumption seems to be that home site leases are commercial in nature when they are not. They are not. Home site leases are not for-profit ventures. Our staff has called bonding companies, and I know that our staff here will describe that. Frankly, families do not have the credit requirements or financial resources to provide these types of bonds. For example, suppose you're lucky enough to have a house or a land home site valued at $150,000. This is an example. The rental bond, the cost on that will be $7,000 a year. $7,000 a year. Who has that money? A performance bond for this nice $150,000 home would require $150,000 worth of liquid assets. Did the drafters contact bonding companies and see if these requirements were even feasible for Indian families? We were told that remediation and restoration bonds would be impossible. They wouldn't provide them to us as families, Indian families on trust land. While requiring insurance on homes placed on a home site lease is a best practice, it is simply not practical. Families with limited discretionary money funding will and should first focus on putting food on the table for our children and our families and clothes on their backs before all else. Did the Bureau contact insurance companies to even find out if requiring insurance was feasible for allotted landowner families? Number 6, the proposed regulations place financial compensation before long-standing cultural practices and values. The community believes that monetary value and liability should not be the sole factors that Secretary determines whether a home site lease is in the landowner's best interest. Other considerations that the Secretary should take into account are, number 1, the cultural and traditional values of the Akamara of the Pima and Tauchitham-Pepash, the Maricopa people at Salt River, and the other tribal people nationally. Number 2, the desperate need for safe and adequate housing in Indian country. Number 3, that rental compensation also should be taken into consideration, that rental compensation may make building a home unattainable or repairs unattainable for poor or elderly tribal members. Then the overall desire of Indian people that have not had an opportunity to have a home, their ability to come home and to build a stable, contribute to a strong and stable tribal community will be affected or prohibited.
President Enos, I know that we're going to have a lot of discussions, we're going to have a lot of comments, and I know we've gotten your written comments, so I want to make sure that everybody else has an opportunity to I'm not trying to cut you off, and we will get to all your comments, but I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to bring up their remarks too. So
let me finish up.
Sure.
I'm getting to the end.
All right.
You must be psychic. Number 7. This, you asked for what is it we're suggesting, what is it we're recommending. Right now, those 400 plus homes and families that don't have a valid lease where we thought we had one, they have to be grandfathered in. We met the requirements. Let's partnership and go back and do what we can to grandfather in those 400 homes at Salt River, 400 plus. They were built according to what the BIA required at the time, in good faith. So let's work constructively to do that. All the same points that I'm making apply to those. We should be given every opportunity to follow the regulations that were in place at the time. I want to conclude and ask some time for my members here, but the proposed regulations will bring home site building repairs to a standstill at Salt River. Like every other family in this country and in this world, we need to have safe housing, safe, clean, stable housing. The proposed regulations on home site lease are a huge step in the wrong direction, and these regulations must be withdrawn from implementation. The Department of the Interior does not have the budgetary or staffing resources to implement these home site regulations, nor do Indian families, nor do we have the financial resources to provide for appraisals, rental compensation, rental adjustments, performance, rental, or reclamation bonding. You asked earlier under page 9 for suggestions on the where we can't meet the 100% consent requirements. Our suggestion here is that the Bureau use the best interest analysis in those situations and consider hardship in that analysis, but also under the Cobell settlement, there were large sums of money to address fractionated land interest problems. I would urge that the tribe, in its trust responsibility, and I appreciate what you said earlier about owing a trust responsibility to all those absent or even the unwilling members of family or allotment. The Bureau ought to use that money and administer that and not put that burden on the community, since it's something that the Bureau is creating. So those are our comments, and thank you for hearing me out. I have a lot more to say, and I'm going to continue to visit you. Thank you.
Thank you, President Enos. I appreciate your comments and